Ja, meine Damen und Herren, ich begrüße ganz herzlich zum heutigen Abend, zur heutigen Vorlesung. Es ist eine große Ehre und auch eine große Freude, Sie in das heutige Programm einführen zu dürfen. Mein Name ist Wolfgang Knöbel, ich bin hier Direktor des Hamburger Instituts für Sozialforschung. Und ich glaube, nicht nur ich, sondern auch das ganze Institut, hier alle Mitglieder des Instituts und Mitarbeiter sind sehr froh und auch sehr stolz, dass wir heute Abend hier Ève Chiapello hier haben, die zu Work of Financialization sprechen wird. Dieses Event heute, dieses Ereignis ist nur möglich geworden durch die Kooperation zwischen der Hamburger Universität und dem Hamburger Institut für Sozialforschung. Ich möchte mich dann deswegen auch ganz herzlich bedanken für die Zusammenarbeit mit der Fakultät für Wirtschafts- und Sozialwissenschaften. Ich will mich auch natürlich dann bedanken bei der Dekanin, Frau Löschper, die dankenswerterweise, und obwohl sie krank ist, zu uns gekommen ist und einige Grußworte sagen wird. Danach werde ich nochmal das Wort übernehmen, werde dann Frau Engels, die durch den heutigen Abend führen wird, die auch die Diskussion leiten wird, zu ihr etwas sagen, und danach wird Frau Chiapello das Wort haben. Frau Löschper, bitte.
Ja, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren, ich freue mich auch sehr, dass ich hier sein darf und hier sein kann. Ich habe es heute Morgen nicht geglaubt, dass es geht. Ich begrüße Sie sozusagen als die Hausherrin nicht hier dieses Hauses, sondern der Institution, in der Frau Chiapello zu Gast ist, und wollte Ihnen sagen, dass ich stolz bin. Wenn wir unter uns wären, würde ich sogar sagen, ich platze fast vor Stolz, dass es uns gelungen ist, Frau Chiapello hier nach Hamburg zu holen. Und das haben wir gemacht, indem wir das Instrument des Anneliese-Meyer-Forschungspreises verwendet haben. Wir haben uns vor einigen Jahren, vor 2 Jahren, im Rahmen von vielen strategischen Überlegungen, die man wie ich als Dekanin oder als Dekanat anzustellen hat, nicht nur gefragt, wie können wir die Fakultät aufstellen, in welche Richtung wollen wir gehen, was sollen unsere Schwerpunkte sein, wie können wir auch den öffentlichen Dialog befördern, den intellektuellen Austausch befördern, haben wir uns vor allen Dingen auch gefragt, mit welchen Persönlichkeiten in der Wissenschaft wollen wir eng kooperieren. Und da ist die Idee entstanden, dass eine sehr gute Idee wäre, mit Frau Chiapello zusammenzuarbeiten. Und warum das so ist, das muss ich Ihnen eigentlich nicht erläutern. Der Hintergrund ist, dass Ihre Arbeiten zur Financialisierung eben State of the Art sind, dass Frau Chiapello ganz wichtige Impulse für die sozialwissenschaftliche Forschung gegeben hat und gibt, aber eben auch den intellektuellen, den öffentlichen Diskurs befördert und eine breite Öffentlichkeit unmittelbar mit relevanten Fragen anspricht. Und deswegen bin ich sehr froh, dass wir diesen Anneliese-Meyer-Forschungspreis für Frau Chiapello Sie dafür nominieren konnten. Und ich möchte mich heute hier sehr herzlich bei Frau Knoll und Frau Engels bedanken, die das Engagement gemacht haben und die Arbeit in diese Beantragung gesteckt haben. Und auch natürlich bei denen, die das begutachtet haben und auf andere Weise befördert haben. Und ich denke, dass die Auszeichnung, die Frau Chiapello für ihre Arbeit bekommen hat, jetzt der Beginn einer langen und wunderbaren Freundschaft sein wird, denn sie ist für mehrere Aufenthalte in unserem Forschungszentrum Globalisierung und Governance zu Gast. Und ich bin auch sehr froh, dass über unsere gemeinsame Kooperation, die wir vereinbart haben und die intensiver geworden ist in den letzten Monaten, dass wir das heute mit einem lebendigen Beispiel noch verstärken können. Und jetzt wünsche ich Ihnen allen einen anregenden Abend und bedauere sehr, dass ich am Ende, wenn es den Wein gibt, das ist sonst eigentlich immer für mich ein wichtiger Punkt, heute nicht dabei sein kann, aber dann denke ich an meine Gesundheit und sage von zu Hause Prosit.
So, thank you very much, Professor Gabriele Löschper. But I also would like to thank the director of the Center for Globalization and Governance here at Hamburg University, Professor Anita Engels, who, to my knowledge, and it was already emphasized by Professor Löschper, was very much responsible for the fact that Professor Chiapello is and will be here in Hamburg. It will be her task to introduce Ève Chiapello to all of you. It will be my task and pleasure to say a few words about Anita Engels herself, who by her help, to emphasize this again, made all that possible. Professor Engels studied sociology in Bielefeld and Marseille and made her doctoral degree at the Institute of Science and Technology Studies in Bielefeld. Afterwards, as a postdoctoral researcher, she went to Stanford before coming back to Germany again. In 2005, she became junior professor here at Hamburg University, and since 2009, she is Lehrstuhlinhaberin for the sociology of science also here at Hamburg University, and, as already mentioned, the central figure within the Center for Globalization and Governance. There's not time enough to point to all the important positions she had and, of course, still has. I just would like to mention two more. She is also a board member of the Center for Earth System Research and Sustainability, and she is the speaker of the Cluster of Excellence, Integrated Climate System Analysis and Prediction. No wonder, therefore, that her numerous books on institutional change, on the role of science within the debate on climate change, on economic sociology, and on the career paths of women within academia belong to the standard works of the discipline. I'm really glad that Anita Engels will introduce Ève Chiapello and moderate the discussion after the talk. It's your turn.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I think by now you're already quite impressed, but yet you're all waiting for the talk by Ève Chiapello. So I decided that I won't bore you a long time with telling you details about her life, and I will also make it a little bit more easier for her, because if I, go on with a laudatio like that, then she will be embarrassed to death by the time I'm ending. But I mean, you all know, and for the details, you all have this yellow leaflet about her, and so you can read about the important stages of her life and about the publications. I think what brought most of you here is probably that she became very well known for her early work on capitalism and critique with Luc Boltanski. She has been very well known for that, and then she developed her analysis of capitalism further for a long time, and a few years ago she started working on the topic of financialization, and that also brought us together. I work a lot on climate change, and as you might have heard, very important and powerful actors in society try to convince us that financialization is the solution to the climate problem. Yeah, there are many ways, congenious ways of transforming the problem of climate change into investment opportunities. And I always wonder, well, but how is that done? How do they do that? And what comes out of it? And with what side effects? And what does that mean for the opportunity to deal with climate change inside capitalism? So that's my perspective on her work. That's where we link up. But there are, of course, also all kinds of other social problems that are financialized, and I'm very happy to now not let you wait any longer, but hear Ève's talk about the work of financialization. Thank you.
Okay, so good evening. Thank you for the free introductions. Very nice. So I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. And as maybe it has been mentioned, because I don't understand German, I'm very sorry, and I don't even speak German, but you understood that I will come back regularly during the next 5 years in Hamburg to work with Hamburg colleagues. And so we have already different projects together, and all these projects actually concern the topic I will address tonight. So actually what I will present is is more the general framework of what I intend to do rather than what has been done. So you have to take it as it is. Okay, so the title is The Work of Financialization. Maybe it's a bit strange, and I hope you'll understand why at the end of the lecture. So, but first we have to, oh my God, I have to put the clock, because if not, I'm going to talk too long. Yes. Okay. So first we have to start by the second word. What is financialization? So financialization is usually defined as the main feature of contemporary capitalism. There are many different ways to describe this process of financialization of the economy, which began to develop in the 80s and then accelerated in the 90s. But financialization is usually associated with the financial market's growing influence in all human affairs. Let's first mention the growing influence of financial markets in the way the firms operate, in the influence in their mode of management and in their organization. Notably, the growing importance of institutional investors in the capital of firms triggered big changes in corporate governance. They promoted what has been called the shareholder value. There is a huge amount of work about the influence of the shareholder value in the management of the firms. That's why I'm mentioning that. So these investors promoted the shareholder value and the necessity for most firms to increase the share of their income they distribute to the shareholders, often at the expense of the wages paid to employees and the taxes paid to public authority. We can also look at the growing influence of financial markets for states, whose debt has surged over years, partly to rescue the financial system after 2008. And states are now kept on a short chain by their creditors, who almost claim they are a constituency more important for states than their citizens. So I may quote, for example, the work by Wolfgang Strick. And according to him, this process is undermining even the democratic dimension of our states. Whatever the result of the political election, the public policies seem to be constrained by the financial market opinion. It is argued that the financial debt of states is more imperative than any other social debt. So the process of financialization is thus redefining whole sectors of the economy. These are only two big examples, all the firms in the States, and transforming business operation logic as well as public policies. So as you understand now, the concept itself of financialization is a critical concept. It's as capitalism. Capitalism is born in a critical, born from a critical intent. And it's the same with this concept of financialization. This concept has been coined by social scientists criticizing the process, this financialization, and trying to highlight its negative impacts. Let's mention a few of them. First, of course, the social impacts of financialization, which is accused of feeding growing inequalities between workers and between work and capital. And there's a lot of work also on economic impacts of financialization, which is seen as leading to recurring financial crises that have high social cost. Financial stability is less and less certain, and the financial cycles have major repercussions on the cycle of the real economy. New systemic risks are fueled by finance. Financialization is also accused of diverting investment in the real economy away from non-financial and from small and medium firms. It is accused of shortening investors' time horizon, and so on. So we have a lot of work criticizing financialization. As usually I said, as here the financialization concept is understood as a morphological transformation of the capitalism as a system. But let's finish with this definition of financialization, and we will see that financialization is carried by a rising group of financial operators, such as all these types of investment funds, pension funds, private equity funds, and so on, and also a rising group of people working in the service industry associated with these financial activities, audit and consulting, law firms, assessors, rating agencies, information providers, and so on. The professionals working in these activities are more numerous, more powerful, and wealthier than ever. They exercise the best paid jobs in contemporary society. This explains why today a bigger share than ever of the most talented students of new generations decide to enter this career and join consulting and financial firms. Just to take an example, in France, almost 30% of the best trained engineers, and you may know that engineering school in France, they are considered as top school, but at least 30% of best trained engineers enter consulting and financial industry. They do not enter in the real industry, but the other industry, which is interesting also that it is called in an industry. So financialization, of course, comes with a change in the elite composition. And it also carries a special conception of the world, a new culture. It carries with it methods to analyze problems, calculation techniques, and decision-making principles. And this is the cognitive and technical aspects of financialization. Professionals of finance have some expertise. They master specific techniques, use special methods to address problems. So financialization comes up with a technical culture mainly handled and mastered by these people. So the argument I want to make today, one of the arguments I want to make today, is that financialization, understood as this huge process, systemic process, understood as a macroeconomic change, come also with a huge but gradual change in the composition of elites and their culture. So financialization has triggered a change in the legitimate way of understanding the problems our developed societies face, a change in the representations of the suitable ways to craft solutions to try and solve them. And finally, a change in what can be called a new spirit, again, of capitalism, but that is now highly financialized. So I argue that special conceptions of the world, methods to analyze problems, calculation techniques, and decision-making principles, which were originally forged to account for a limited number of special cases into the financial sector, are now tending to spread to all questions and human activities. This phenomenon can also be called financialization, but it means here the colonization of the world by the instruments, methods, and theories of modern finance. A striking aspect of this colonization is the role of financial tools to address the problems of contemporary capitalism. And indeed, a great many reform plans and systems devised in response to the crisis our developed societies face draw on the knowledge, know-how, problem identification, and problem-solving methods of finance professionals. A long list of the crises. First, the economic and the social crisis. Let's mention sluggish economic growth, mass unemployment, job insecurity, declining social mobility, the welfare state crisis, let's say, social security deficits, government debt, and a tremendous desire from some part of the political scape to cut public spending. And probably the most worrying of all the crises, the environmental crisis, with the global warming, the loss of biodiversity. And of course, all that in the context of the development challenges. We are currently just above 5 billion people on the planet, and by 2050 there will be almost 10 billion people. And unfortunately, we will have to make it with the same nice blue planet and its limited resource in energy, water, and food. Probably no other generation in the history of mankind has to face these difficulties. So, in face of that, of course, it would not be fair to say that we are standing idle. Tremendous efforts of all kinds are made to produce new knowledge and innovation, to change our way of life, values, polity, to invest in new infrastructure, to help poor countries to adapt, and so on. And intensive work, collective work is going on involving political administrative personnel, trade unions, think tanks, intellectuals, schools, NGO, consultants, companies, and so on, what I used to call a reforming nebula. But what is very striking when you observe all these people, this process, is the importance taken by all the proposals crafted in the language of finance, using the tools and the techniques of finance. Said differently, many solutions are rooted in the new financialized culture of the elites of our financialized capitalism. Let's take some examples. So what is important is that examples. This is a report that have been issued maybe 2 years ago about the development of a new financial market called the impact investing market. If they try to attract private investors into the social activities. Another example, another report, this time issued by the World Bank, in order to also attract private investors to finance development solutions in the developing countries. This is an EU program in order to finance innovation, which is something very important for to deal with the growth problem. And finally, one of the many financialized tools for dealing with the climate change. What is very striking in all that is that for all these people trying to build this kind of reform plan, financialization is not a problem, as it was for the critic who coined the word. It is actually a solution. It is a way of responding to the problems encountered by the contemporary capitalist society. So to answer innovation or social and environmental problems, they propose actually to translate all the problems into a form that is manageable by finance. It is something that can be very difficult and costly. It requires lots of work, imagination, intellectual investment, and this work is what I call the work of financialization. So my first research purpose in the coming year, would be to underline and to reveal this common feature, common to many private initiatives or public policies concerning issues as different as, for example, development aid, global warming, science and innovation policy, arts and cultural policy. Then I want to understand very precisely what does it mean for these issues, social, environmental, developmental, and so on, to be financialize? What does it mean for them? Or are these issues changed and transformed? What is won and what is lost in this process? So how do I intend to handle this research project? By choosing a sample of instruments or initiatives or project, reform instruments, initiative and project, and try to understand very precisely using the kind of methodology that have been developed by the sociology of science and techniques. All these instruments, initiative and so on, work, sorry for the S, or they are made, on what kind of knowledge they are based, and what kind of power they give, what kind of power gives them birth. And this work, of course, requires to pay attention very precisely to the different tasks that are performed, that is, to follow the work and the workers of financialization. So now we are just, I will now describe what is the work of financialization in order to understand exactly what is the purpose of that. I have to precise that the financialization work is most frequently guided by the idea that it is necessary to mobilize private money to invest, because it is said that the needs are too important to be covered only by public money, because they said the states are not able anymore to invest because of their debt or because they are not efficient, and so on. So the driving idea behind this work of financialization is to use public money to, as they say again, leverage private investors. So what is behind this reform project is a complete redefinition of the use of the public money, which is not to finance directly the general programs, but to use the private money to attract private investors and make them do the job for us. So it's a complete change also in the meaning of what is a state. So at this point, if we want to go and try to understand how it is possible to transform a public interest problem into something that is interesting for a private investor, it is necessary to look at the toolbox of finance. I will explain why. Scrutinizing the tools is a way to understand how finance sees the world and how finance can think about fixing the world. When you have a screwdriver, everything looks like a screw. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Conversely, if you want to talk to people having a hammer, here the financiers, and convince them to use their hammer, you have to transform everything into a nail. Okay? So that's the problem. If you want to, when you financialize problems, you have to transfer the problems in order to have the private investor recognizing a problem they can fix. Okay? So we have to understand how is the hammer and what kind of nail they need. So it was the first part of the work I've done in previous year, was to understand what are the characteristics of this financial way. I will not go very deeply in the characteristics, but I will give you only two characteristics. The first one is that the tools, financial tools, are infused by an investor's view. For an investor, something is valuable. Something valuable is something which deserves investment. And it deserves investment because it will produce return in the future. And that something that produces returns in the future is called a capital. And there exists a formula to calculate, to value the capital maybe those who are, it is a very simple formula for financial people. It's the discounted cash flow formula, and here you see the value of the capital is the sum of the cash flows that are actualized. So you have the capital is the sum of future cash flows. And you see here the value, the definition of what is valuable is very different, is very specific. We could imagine another definition of value that, for example, could be based not on the future, but on the time, the cost, or the care we have dedicated to the valuable thing, and or to attend the person. I like to quote the French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and the Little Prince Wisdom. Little Prince, you know probably this book. And so you know the wisdom of the Little Prince. He says, the rose, what did the rose say to the Little Prince? It is the time you spend to look after your rose that makes it so important to you. And so you see this definition of the value is a backward looking definition. You look at all the care you have given to the thing. But with the financial view, what is valuable is what you'll get in the future. Yeah. So it's as if you look at your kids as people who will give you some return in the future. You know, they will for example, look after you when you'll be retired. And the only value of the of the kid would be that. So this is the way the investors look at things in general. So, the investor's view explain why, when you adopt this view, everything valuable is redefined as being a capital. Natural capital, social capital, intellectual capital, human capital, probably you know all these expressions. If it is called a capital, it is because it is seen as giving returns, as producing services, as giving you back something in the future. And every public policy can be redefined in this language. Education can be seen as an investment in human capital, a capital that is owned by people that will provide them employment and salaries. Cultural policy can be seen as an investment in reputation, in creativity, in image that will produce a capacity to innovate, tourism income, and that will make your territory attractive for highly educated workers. So our times are those of a large extension of the idea of capital, of what can be seen as capital. So I have a collection of capital extension. Let's say, for example, give you, okay, this is a framework to that have been issued by a French think tank, and they try to promote the idea that for a business company not only has the formal capital that is in the liability side of its balance sheets, but it has also many 10 other types of capital. You see natural capital, brand capital, provider capital, and even I like it very much, shareholder capital, this one. Maybe. I like this one. It's not the same, you know, as the money put on the business firm by the shareholders. You have a shareholder capital when you have long-term shareholders, long-term oriented shareholders, people who are very interesting, that give you nice insight and so on. So all that has a value. So it can be also called capital. These people are quite influential. They are working with the French Ministry of the Economy, so we don't have to joke about this framework. Another framework produced by another think tank, and this one also is a very important framework. It has been issued by the Integrated Reporting, which is let's say an association trying to renew the accounting standards, and they want to enlarge here you have the firm, and they want usually in our capitalist society, usually you have an investment in capital, in financial capital, then you have the production, and then you have profit. And part of the profit is accumulated, and it's just an increase of financial capital. So it is here. You have financial capital, which is among the input, and you have financial capital in the output. And with this framework, these people, they are accounting. You have all the big audit firm working on that and so on. They just explain that for a firm, you have manufacturer capital, intellectual capital, human capital, social capital, natural capital. All these capitals are inputs of the business model, and the company will produce also outcomes, which means increase, hopefully, of financial capital, manufacturer capital, and so on and so on. So it's completely, they try to renew completely the vision of the firm. And they work also with the big standard board. For the moment, they have not issued very precise standards, but they are working hard and they are highly financed. Okay, so just a few examples of this large extension and this idea that everything can be seen as capital, and that maybe we could renew the understanding of capitalism of the states. So this is only the first part. We are very far from having, for the moment, a private investor investing in our problems. We have to understand that it is very complicated to convert or to change something valuable into something investable. So how can you, for example, transform a forest that you care for, and very important for climate change, for example, and for biodiversity, by the way, or an initiative to develop schooling in poor countries in something investable. Okay, that is a contract that private investor will sign in order to finance this thing. So it's a huge challenge. So the first step is the one we have already seen. It's the first operation is a work of qualification and interpretation of the world using the words and the perspective on investor. So this is the first step. Financializing is primarily treating everything as a matter of investment, of money or effort, that is, as a capital. We already seen this first step. Then the second activity consists of embodying these so far metaphorical concept of natural, cultural, human, and other types of capital. It consists in turning capital into assets. This supposes first to make explicit the contours of risk of capital, the types of returns, the types of services and benefits that can be expected from them. And of course, if we look at these two examples, the return of education, the kind of services that education will provide, or the return that the forest will provide, are completely different. So you need a huge intellectual investment in order to define what could be the return of this very different case. And here these people need, of course, the expertise of the specialists of the nature, or the specialists of the social activities, and so on. Let's take an example for the biodiversity story. Here it's a list that has been produced by people in charge of the trying to monitor. Okay, it's the economics and of ecosystem biodiversity. And these people, they are funded by the United Nations bodies on environment, and they have made a list of all the services that are provided by nature in general. And you see you have 4 categories of services. The nature can provide food, water, raw material. They can provide regulating services like air quality regulation, climate regulation. They can provide habitat services. And I like very much the last part. They provide also cultural, aesthetics, inspirational services. So there are all the returns that can be provided by nature. And so here the work consists in making very precise lists, defining very precisely all the services, and then once you have the services, you can try to find metrics, quantitative metrics. How do you count the food? How do you count the aesthetics and so on? And then, after all this work, maybe you can put a monetary value. So this is the third step. You have quantification, then maybe monetization. So it's another step. To take another example, in the social sector, not in the environmental sector, this is a methodology that have been crafted by, at the beginning, it was private equity people in California. They invented the social return on investment. And they established a general methodology, and here you have the step of specifying exactly what are the returns. So there is a methodology. You have to identify stakeholders. You have to map outcomes and so on. Then you quantify the outcomes. And then you monetize, and finally you can calculate something like a social return on investment. And you may, at the end of this huge process, very costly, because it really depends on each activity, maybe you have such a very nice number, saying for €1 of investment, you provide €2 of social value. So that kind of methodology is issued by the UK Cabinet Office. It is taught in business school, and you have, at least in France, more and more NGOs that are paying consultants to make such an analysis, and then they can say to their private investor, invest on me, which means fund me, because when you fund me, when you put €1, I produce €10 of social value. So So then the last step is to structure monetary flows, because it's not because you have a good narrative saying that it is very interesting to invest on your activity. It is not because you talk capital and so on that people, those who have the money, they are completely convinced that they can give you the money. So you still need to make an effort, and this is coming to be very tricky. So if you want people to put money in your activity, you have to sell them something, and if you have understood well, you sell promises of return. You sell them promise of return. And you sell promise, and you have to channel returns, of course. And some of these nice investors could be interested in social return, but most of them are interested in financial return. So which means that you have to invent financial return for activities that are not profitable. So how do you do it? It's here that the public money becomes very interesting. So usually in that kind of device you need if you want to convince private investors to invest, most of them need financial return, because they are capitalist people. They have money, they want a return on their money, and so you have different way of giving return to these people. First, you can provide them with tax relief, and here the return is given by the tax relief. Okay. The investor will get tax reduction if they invest in some not profitable project. Or you can sign agreements promising public payment on result, as in the experiment of social impact bonds. Here you have the design, where the return to investors investing in not profitable activities is given by the government if the social results are reached. Actually, it's as if the government is buying, it's a reduction, but the government in this kind of scheme, they buy the social impact. So you have the social impact that have been evaluated with all the metrics and so on and so on and so on. And then the private investors say, okay, I invest and I sell the government the social impact that I will produce, that is supposedly social impact for the whole society, for the society, but the private investor need to channel a return toward itself. So it's a way of doing that. The second big characteristic of financial thinking, the first one was the capital thinking. The second characteristic is what I call the risk reduction characteristics. It is based on the portfolio management. And most of the decisions of financiers are based on the two criteria of risk and return. And again, if we follow this criteria of the risk, we can also find out many different operations of financialization. The first step, the discursive step, can be noticed here. For example, you have a big effort made there. You see, it's the United Nations Environmental Program. They have a special fund which is called the UNEP Finance Initiative. And here they produce a leaflet especially for chief executive officer. And when you see it's finance plus they talk to business. And when they talk to business to share their concern about nature, they need to talk risk and return. And so you have this, for example, this representation, which is nice. You have all the problems you can get, like and you see coastal flooding, drought, desertification, water scarcity, and all these problems are translated into something which is costly here and with a probability, but that is a risk. It's a way to do it. What is also nice, even if I have not looked at it very carefully, but we'll do it with Anita in the following years, is to convert risk into asset. And I think it's really what is happening with the carbon market. You have the climate risk, which is converted into an asset. And usually a risk is a liability. But thanks to the financial aptitude to change everything, it can become an asset. So it's another way of doing that. And you have also when you try to attract financial investor, you need to build return, and also it is important to reduce the risk they face. And you have many different strategies, again, to reduce their risk. One which is widely used is to give public guarantee. And here you have, here it's a public policy to fund, you see, long-term investment, which can be investment in infrastructure, especially for the ecological turn, or small and medium cap firm, which are, they have problem to be funded. And here you have a big financial scheme. Here you have the EU guarantee. Here you have public money channeled through a public investment fund. And altogether, they build a new fund. Again, all these vehicles are very common for the financial professionals. And thanks to all this arrangement of public finance, maybe you'll have possible public and private contribution coming in too. But you see, these are certain contribution coming from the public, and here you have possible. I like very much this. So you have possible contribution, and thanks to this big montage, I don't know how to say it in English, probably you'll be able to channel fund towards this very important case. And another way to reduce the risk of investors is to construct the liquidity of their investment. So one way to do it, I'm completely confused with my note. One way to do it is to use securitization. Thanks to securitization, it makes it easier to resell the investment. One example could be the development of green bonds, for example. Or you can build a dedicated marketplace, so a place where, even if it is not exactly a security, but where the contracts, you see we have contracts that have been signed, a place where people could sell the contracts. And the last way to build liquidity is to dedicate a special cash fund to repay investors under condition if they want. For example, they invest, supposedly they should be there for 8 years, but some of them would like maybe to divest. And so you decide to keep maybe 10% of the investment in cash just to face the risk of them asking to be reimbursed. So it's another way to do it. It's almost finished. So we have a lot we have many different kind of operations that have to be studied. You see, it's very complex, all this story. And it's mainly a research project. So I will just finish by this question: why should we study this financialization work with this at this precise scale? First, I think it's very important to understand how our concerns are redefined, are changed, and translated through these processes. And what does financialization do to this social development, growth, environmental issues? It's very important to understand what we lose, especially in this process. We also have to understand what does this financialization do to public policy. And is it really true that the same kind of activities will be financed with that? Probably no. I have already the answer. Probably, but the target and the activities that will be financed will be, of course, different in the end. But we have to define how much and what will be financed and so on. And finally, the last objective would be to understand the actors and why they participate. Because, of course, we have many financial actors, consultants, and so on. But we also have here people who are expert in conservation, for example. And these people, they cannot be suspected of being fond of finance. Or you have people in charge of NGOs and so on. And so it's important to understand why they participate in this process. I will, by the way, nevertheless, finish by the financial actors' role in this process. Because when we look at all these examples, they are often the main promoters of these solutions, because they put a lot of money in producing reports, in funding experiments, and so on. And so we can ask the question whether they are or not the main winner of this financialization of the public problems. Few hints, maybe to think that maybe they win more than other people. First, when you try to fix the problems with the power of finance, of course, you do not question the responsibility of the financialization in the problem's production. Financialization, which was a problem, became a solution So you do not question anymore. You just rely on these actors that have become so powerful to fix the problem we have. It's a way of escaping in some way the responsibility. The second point is that this process of financialization tends to reinforce all the financial assumptions. For example, this idea that when you invest on a project, you should be free to divest, you need to get liquidity. The problem is that when you ask for liquidity, you just think that it is not important to be, committed in the long term for a project. You feel it's normal to be liquid. So you reinforce this idea. And also you reinforce the idea that to give a return on capital is a constraint that you have to meet. To say it otherwise, it would be maybe clearer. All these solutions take for granted that it is better to borrow money from the rich rather than to tax them. It's the story. And finally, the last question where we could ask is, what is the remuneration of intermediaries? The lawyers, the consultants, the market makers, the fund managers, all these people who will be in charge of the functioning of this new financialized solution. All these people will be paid very well, much better than the previous social workers, civil servant in charge of looking after the nature and so on. And maybe we could think that it's a bit costly. This way of channeling money toward this cause could be costly. Thank you very much.